Okay, so we're going to show you how we make our sourdough. If you want the recipe, the actual recipe, send me a message and I'll send it to you. It's from like an online course that we took, so I don't really want to just hand it out or put it up online anyway. If you have any questions as we're going, just put it in the comment box and we'll try and address things like I'll try and address things like later. Just things like maybe more tips specifically on your starter, more things on what you do with extra pieces or extra bread. Just if you have any comments, put them in the comment box. But for today, step one, I would say, is make sure you have everything that you are going to need to do your sourdough. So what we do is, what I do is I put everything out the night before. I weigh out my flour because I'm feeding my starter anyway. So I fed my starter last night, and I put my flour in my bucket. I will say, I have always used just a metal bucket. I will say that I bought a plastic bucket specifically because there's one thing that I learned from my course and that I hope you learned today. It's that sourdough is like, temperature is everything. It is so dependent on temperature, and the metal bowls was just keeping my dough so cold, and I never realized it. So I was actually not proofing my dough ever. Like, I wasn't proofing it. It wasn't fully developed before baking, which is so important. So I put mine in a plastic bowl. So I have measured out 400 grams of flour, and I also have my salt. I have 8 grams of salt. So you can do, for sourdough, it's basically the hydration in the flour that is what makes it light and fluffy. You can do different percentages of hydration. Okay, so for sourdough, you can do different levels of hydration for the water. Ours is, I think it's around 75%, but you can also change it. So we're gonna do 272 grams of water, and then I've got 8 grams of salt here. I'm gonna put like 10 grams of water in here just for when we add the salt later. And then I also have my starter that was fed last night, so it's active and ready to go. So I have everything that I need. That's the first step. Next, we're going to add our water to our flour, which is going to, hold on, just a minute. Okay, ready? Just a minute. So now we're gonna mix it up. Hi. This is just flour and water. So what we're doing is we're just mixing it into a clump, and we are going to let it autolyse, which means it's starting to break down the flour, and the gluten and stuff starting to break down and become stretchy into a dough. So sourdough just takes time, but if you have time, the longer you let it do its work, the less work you have to do. So, can I help you?
I'll just watch you.
So, I'm gonna zoom you in so you can see what's going on. Okay, can Mama try? Okay, so we're just gonna mix this together. It doesn't have to be like, it's not going to be a dough. It's just to mix together the water and the dough. And nope, the salt goes in much later. Just a minute, please.
Okay. You're taking all of
Okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna squish it together. Okay, and I'm just gonna leave it like that. So what else I like about this container is it has a lid. So because sourdough, it's about the hydration in the water, the hydration in the dough, in the bread. So you don't want to let it dry out. So you don't necessarily want to just leave it out in the open. So that's why I like this container, because it has a lid that seals. So we are going to let it seal, and we're just going to let it sit for like 1 to 4 hours. So I'm going to come back this afternoon or around lunch, and we will add the salt and then add the starter. Okay, so I'm just gonna keep my camera this way and talk to you so you can see what I'm doing. So I have let this sit for over 4 hours now, actually. So hopefully you can kind of tell. You can see it's kind of getting stickier. It's not clumpy. It's actually like stretchy. And so now we're going to add our starter. 80 grams of starter. And you can do a float test to see if your starter's ready. I know mine's ready. I've watched it rise. It's nice and bubbly. You can see that. You can actually hear it too. So anyways, we're gonna add 80 grams of starter in here. And with the daily amount that I love you too. With the daily, no, you need to be quiet, honey.
Well,
no, you need to be quiet, or you come and do this with me. Okay. Okay, so I've got my starter in here. I'm just going to mix it in. It helps if your hands are damp. So I'm just gonna mix it in together. I like to dimple it. It's just a little bit easier. It doesn't have to be crazy mixed, just as long as it's mixed in there a bit. And we're just gonna set it aside for 10 to 30 minutes. I'll probably do more like 10 minutes, and then we are going to add the salt. Okay, so now we're gonna add our water. And so I filled this with flour the night before, so it's all ready, right? And then I fill up a cup with water, just so it's room temperature, because if it's too cold, the dough will ferment slower. So we actually now we need water in here. We're just gonna put a little bit of the water just to help mix the salt. Because if you just pour the salt on with no water, it kind of goes clumpy, I find anyway. So we're just gonna pour our salt over the top. And all done with this water. I just dimple it in. This is just the way that I learned on the course. This is what she does, and this is what I like to do. Can you wait until we're done the bread, please?
How do you smell?
Okay, so we just really want to mix in the salt, and you can feel like when you add the salt, you can feel this like change the dough. It's changing into a dough, like you can feel it. So anyways, now what we want to do is we want to blend it together enough just so that we can see. It's kind of hard for me to see how you can get kind of a window pane effect before it starts to tear. So that's what you want. So we're gonna put the lid on, just keep the moisture contained. If you don't have a lid, just stick it inside of like a plastic produce bag. And then I'm gonna let it sit for 45 minutes, and then I'm gonna come and I'll show you, we're just gonna do the stretch and folds. Now, I just wanna take a note. You can actually stick a thermometer. So I have this thermometer that does like an instant temperature. So I can stick it in there to see what the dough is fermenting at. Having said that, okay, so the temperature of your room is going to play a huge role in your dough fermenting. So if it's cold in here, and this is fermenting like under 70 degrees, it's gonna take a lot longer, like 6 to 8 hours of fermenting until it's ready. So I'll kind of show you how to tell if it's ready or not. By that time, I'm gonna say, because our fireplace just broke and we're in a trailer and it's cold outside, so I'm gonna say that it won't be ready until like 8 o'clock. So I'll show you the tips along the way, so how you know when it's ready. This was key for me. This is what I was not doing before. I didn't know. I just did my 4 stretch and folds and that was it. But now we actually know how to tell when it is ready, when it is fermented. And so we've got our starter added and our salt added, and now we just wait, and now the magic happens. Okay, so it's been 45 minutes. I'm gonna zoom you guys in so you can see. Well, maybe you can see better like this actually. So it's flattened out, it's quite flat. Okay, so I'm gonna wet my hand a little bit just to help so that my fingers don't stick, because you can see like it's very sticky. And it's supposed to be sticky. And that's because it's hydrated. So I'm just gonna take and pull it. I'm gonna take it from all 4 sides, pull it over, pull. You're just trying to stretch it, okay? And actually, I think it's gonna come right out of the bowl here. Oh. If it does come right out of the bowl, then I just play with it. Just let it stretch, and that's just gonna help build the tension in the dough. Okay, and we just wanna make it into a nice ball before we put it back down, okay? And then we always wanna leave it just in a nice little ball. And that's all there is to it. We're gonna come back and do it again in another 45 minutes to an hour. Okay, so this is the next. So you can see it's flatter, it's not round. It's flattened out a lot. So I'm gonna wet my hand and just do the same thing. So as this dough ferments, it's gonna get harder to stretch it. Like it already is. It doesn't want to stretch as far. Don't push it, like just stretch it as far as it wants. And I'm just gonna leave it again in a nice little ball and come back. Put the lid on. Okay, so before it gets dark, I just wanted to share a couple things with you. Because there's better lighting now, there's natural lighting. So I would say some of the biggest tools or things to like get you started, what you should get first. You can get these, it's just a little plastic, it's a dough scraper. So you can scrape down the sides, but you'll see like when I'm shaping the bread later, you can use it as a bench scraper. But sourdough is sticky and it's supposed to be sticky. And you can add a little bit of flour to it if you need to while you're working with it, if you're just beginning, but it does affect the end result. So what I just wanted to say is that a lot of people do sourdough very differently, and I've seen lots of different like Instagram people, this is the way they do it and this is what other people do it. And I learned like one way, and that's how I had learned it. That was my original video, and then I had kind of followed like random people, was trying to do my own things, and that's kind of where I got carried away and didn't exactly know like the science behind it and why it's doing what it's doing. And that's when I decided I bought a course from the Sourdough Schoolhouse, and it was just amazing. So the courses are not that expensive. If you want something fun to learn about and do, I would just take their course. And she explains a lot on there. So I'm trying to kind of do it as I'm teaching you here. But if you have questions too, comment and we can like try and figure some stuff out. But what I have learned is the temperature does change it a lot, and you're better. And then basically I've just learned a lot about watching the dough and learning about your dough and knowing when it's ready for the next step. So I just want to show you as an example. This is dough that I've like just flipped. So it's still in its nice little bowl. Okay. So as I leave it, because I'm going to let it sit for another 45 minutes to an hour. So this is when it's bulk rising. This is when, because we've added the leaven, the starter, whatever you want to call it, it's the same thing. So we've added the starter. So now the starter is starting to eat the flour and break down and bulk rise, right? So just like when you make your starter and you add fresh flour and it eats it's fermenting, right? It's eating the grains and it grows and grows. That's what's happening now. So it's going to continue to grow and break down and get stretchier. So what we're just trying to do is help it along. So I'm just going to show you guys what I do for my starter upkeep. So I get a clean jar. I'm going to fill it with 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour. And then from my leftover leaven, you can see like it looks empty basically, but I'm going to scrape that out and it's going to end up being about 10 grams. This is what's left over from the loaf that we're making. So usually I would do this at night. Like if I'm going to make another loaf tomorrow, I would do it at night, but I don't know if I'm going to make another loaf. You can always refeed it again if you need to, but let's go ahead and we're going to add 50 grams of water. $50 grams of flour. And I just use like a local organic all-purpose flour. It's an all-purpose, but it's also their bread flour. It's the same flour, so. Okay, and then I'm gonna scrape out what's left in here. And this is gonna be my new starter. Now, if I was just doing a random feed, so if I wasn't making bread, like tomorrow, for example, so see, I'm already past 10 grams there. So if I was, let's just say I was not making bread right now, and I was just doing a regular feed, I'm still gonna do my 50 grams of water, 50 grams of flour, and then I'm gonna take 10 grams of yesterday's and stick it in here. Now you would have a whole bunch left, a whole bunch of starter left in here, right, if you're not gonna use it for bread. So then what you would do is just empty this into the fridge, just keep a jar in the fridge, and that's just keep adding to it your leftover starter, your discard, and then you can use discard recipes to make whatever, crackers or cookies or pizza dough or whatever. So if you don't have a scale, probably want one, but we're just gonna mix it up nice and good here and let it be, and that's all there is to it. Okay, so this one has been sitting for longer than 45 minutes to an hour, just because we did bedtime and all that stuff. So I can actually feel the lid is actually puffy, just from it fermenting in there. So it's a lot. Yeah, it's very flat. I'm going to do one more fold, just because it's still very stretchy. And that's what, if it's like still stretchy, I would always do 4 folds. If your dough is fermenting faster and there's not much stretch in it, you really only need to do this 3 times, and then move on. But I'm gonna do this one more time. And I'm always wanting to pop any large bubbles that I see, because I don't want large bubbles in it. Yeah. Nice and round, so I'll show you what it looks like. I'm gonna give this about half an hour, because it's looking like it's almost there. Okay, so I can tell that this is ready because it's holding its form better, and I'm gonna show you. So I'm gonna change the camera view here. This is where it gets exciting. So I think I was saying earlier, one of the best things I would say to get is grab, these are just plastic bread or dough scrapers. I don't even use my, sometimes I will, but I have a bench scraper too. You'll see me use in a minute. I might have to move the camera down a bit, but this just helps. Look at that, because this is sticky. I honestly don't even think I could move this dough around without the scrapers. Okay, so this is where I do like my test. So I'm just going to spread this out. So this is why I said to get these dough scrapers, because they're cheap and it works just like a bench scraper, really, like, honestly. Okay, so I'm gonna fold it. So if you want to make a circular loaf, you're just gonna fold it all in together, okay, to make one big circle. Now I am going to make a longer loaf. That's just my go-to. So I'm gonna fold it a little bit differently. So I'm just going to, I'm gonna fold it into like a triangle basically. And then you want to dance with your fingers, okay? Don't like really hold on to it, because you don't want it to stick. It's sticky. And I'm just gonna kind of tuck the ends in, and I'm gonna pop any large bubbles I see. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna let this sit on the counter for 20 minutes, okay? I'm just gonna watch it and see how it shapes. If within 20 minutes it's flattened right out, it's not ready. So then what I'm gonna do is the same thing, which is almost exactly the same thing as what you were doing with the bowl too. Right, you're just shaping it. So I can just tell that I think this is ready. I could probably put it in my basket right now, but I'm just gonna let it sit just to see, and then I'll probably just reshape it another time. So one thing I will say is there's a lot of different, like, people do sourdough, like there's so many different ways that people do it that I've seen anyways. So this is basically, I'm trying to get what I just like how the lady says it. She calls it a family crumb. So I don't want giant holes in my dough. Like, I just want a nice clean, there's holes, there's air. So like each cell within the dough has a little pocket of air in it. I don't want it dense, which would mean like if it's overproofed or underproofed, if it doesn't rise properly, like the humidity, because it's a high humidity loaf. If you don't do it properly, then that humidity stays inside and then it gets gummy, and I don't want that either, right? So this is just going for a family, what's called a family crumb. And I'm going to show you how I'm tired. I'm going to show you how I prep my baskets, okay? So I'm going to use a different flour than what my loaf is made out of, just because I don't want the loaf to absorb the flour from like the same flour. So using a different flour, so I've been told it helps it so that it doesn't absorb the flour as much. So I usually use brown rice flour, or I actually used buckwheat flour just to kind of add like a salt and peppery look to it. I'm just going to use brown rice flour, and you're just going to put a nice good coat all on the inside of your basket. So I also use if I'm going to make a round loaf, I'll just put a basket and then I'll put a clean tea towel and then do the same thing. So this is ready. I know it is. I'm not going to let it sit for 20 minutes. So I'm just going to show you. I know that it's ready. If it were to flatten out, I would just do the same thing. Spread it all out and fold it back in. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to pick it up and put it in my basket. And now, basically, okay, I'm going to switch your view here. Okay. So once you've got it flipped, if there's any openings, just pinch it together. Okay, you can just pull it back together. Again, I always pop, if I see some nice bubbles, big bubbles on the outside, I just pop those. And now I'm just gonna let it sit until the dough is ready. So how I know that, and you'll get more of a feel for it. So I'm just gonna put basically you're putting the flour on here, lots and lots of flour, because you don't want it to be sticky. So you can tell when it's ready. So when you push on it, see how fast that rises back? So you want the rise to be slower. It's not going to bounce back quite as quick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in like a produce bag. I just reuse the same bag all the time. And I'm just gonna let it sit on the counter anywhere from half an hour to even up to 2.5 hours, depending on the temperature of your home. Okay, I'm gonna check this. Oh, I'm gonna go do something and come back and check it, okay? And I will show you what it looks like when it's ready. And then once it's ready, that is when we put it in the fridge. And then when you put it, you could bake it right away if you wanted to. But what we are going to do is we're going to stick it in the fridge, and that's when it really starts to eat up all the leftover gluten and the sourdough taste really sets in. So you can leave it in the fridge, they say at least 6 hours, but up to 24 hours. So. Hi guys. Okay, so here's day 2. I'm just going to chat with you on a few things before, and then I'll zoom you in so you can see the bread. So my bread is in the fridge right now. I've got my oven warming up. Remember, everything has to do with temperature. So I've got my oven. I've had it on for at least 45 minutes. You want it to be nice and hot. And I also have whatever it is that my bread is going to cook on in the oven, so it's nice and hot too, because it's that temperature change that is going to help the bread rise. So I always used this broken pizza stone, and that's just what I used. And with sourdough, you need to create steam. So you can do like a sketchy method, which is what I was doing with just some type of stone or a cast iron pan, something that you can put it in and then create steam. So what you can use is, you can either use just like a pan at the bottom of your stove with some rocks, like a sauna. Pour some water over that when you put your loaf in so it creates steam. Or what I always did was just got an oven safe bowl and would fill it with ice, and that would create the steam. It's a little bit harder that way, and it's a little bit harder to tell, like just things don't work out perfectly. I did that for about a year. I recently just bought, it's called a bread cloak, and I just was waiting to figure out like what would the best option be for me. So through this course I learned like cast iron is great, and I know a lot of people do that, or Dutch ovens. The thing with cast iron is it's great because it gets hot, but it's also can get too hot and it can burn the bottom. And anytime I have cooked my bread in my cast iron pan, it has burnt the bottom. So I don't use the cast iron pan. So the bread cloak is actually, it's an Emile Henry that I have, and it's clay. And so anyways, you'll get to see that, and that's what I use. And once I started using it, it was a game changer. But I will say that sourdough kind of seems like, not impossible, but it seems like there's a lot of things, a lot of steps. It doesn't have to be that difficult, honest. Okay, so I got my bread here. And it's risen a little bit. It should have risen a little bit more than that, but that's all right. So basically I've cut some parchment paper here just to the size that I want it, and I'm just gonna lay it right onto the parchment paper. This is just like a pastry brush. You could just use your hands too. We're just going to brush off any excess flour. You take that off. If there wasn't very much, sometimes I will actually take off all this. Like this is just the brown rice flour. So sometimes I will take all the brown rice flour off. Here, can I show you? Watch. And then I would put some fresh all-purpose flour on there, but there's quite a bit of flour on this, so I'm just gonna leave it. Look, all this now. You just wanna brush all this into the, or you can eat it, whatever. So there's quite a bit on here, you can see. And I don't know, I might just clear it all off and all right. So one thing I did learn, because my loaves never, like the flour would never stay on them, it would disappear. I would bake my bread and then it would be gone. And that can actually be because there's too much steam. So the steam just absorbs all the flour that is on the bread. So I'm just gonna leave what's on there. Okay. Well, we're gonna score it, okay? Good job. So let's bring this in a little bit closer. So I got you in a little closer. This is my scoring tool. You can literally just use, like, you can get, these are for like straight razors, and you can get a huge pack of them for so cheap. So scoring is what is going to give your bread that opportunity to rise. So this is where you can get like creative, do some cool drawings, but basically so I'm just gonna go with my normal whatever, like a some wheat grain in here. For some reason, I don't necessarily get creative with this part. I just am like, let's just bake it. I love to see it just baked. So you can do some lightly scoring pieces. You can see that it has gone deep into the bread, but not like crazy deep. So we want one good score that's like 1/4 to 1/2 inch. Sorry, my trailer's shaking. It's my washing machine. Real life, people. Anyways, we want one good, really deep score because that's what's gonna get, the moisture's gonna get in and help it rise, okay? So I'm gonna do one great big score in here. And I am putting my blade on an angle because I want a little bit of an angle because that's what's gonna help this ear to lift. You'll see when we bake it, but I'm just gonna score some extra parts just to make sure it's nice and deep. Okay, so my oven is nice and hot, and I'm gonna move you. All right, so all I'm gonna do, so here's my bread cloak here. You can see that there. You can actually proof it. Like instead of using the bowl that I used to make the bread, I could have used that. Anyways, I'm just gonna take my bread and I'm gonna lay it right on top. And we're gonna cover it. So you want it to be covered for at least 18 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna stick it back in there.
Do I do a button, Mom?
And turn it to 18 minutes. Okay, so it's been 18 minutes. So what we're gonna do is, I'm gonna take the lid off. Look at that. Look at that rise. How beautiful is that? Okay, so I am gonna turn it around just because I know that my oven is going to cook it a little faster at the back. And I'm gonna close it up and I'm gonna turn it. For me, this oven is, I find that it is like always just the same temperature. So anyways, I'm just gonna turn my oven down a little bit because I don't want my loaf to be like a dark brown, like burnt. I like it to be golden. I don't want it quite so burnt looking. So I turn mine down and then I'm gonna turn it back on for another like 18 to 20 minutes. And then I always like just keep an eye on it and I'll look at it and see if it needs a couple more minutes and all that good stuff. Okay, so one thing I forgot to tell you, which I actually didn't do, but it's okay, is you can take a spray bottle and squirt the loaf with water just to help with the steam, to create the steam in there. I forgot to do it. I was too distracted talking to you, but I never used to do that anyway, so it's not something you have to do, but it does help. This is what I will say, like I learned a lot of really good tips on that sourdough schoolhouse. So anyway, so you want your oven to be super hot. You're gonna put your bread in, you're gonna cover it for 18 minutes. Also know your oven. Like my oven cooks hotter at the back. It also doesn't get quite as hot as it should. So I will twist my loaf when I take it off. I'll show you. And you just have to kind of know your oven and how you want it to heat. To move the bread. Like if it gets hotter on the bottom or it's burning, then partway through turn the temperature down or move the bread higher. But the purpose of the bread cloaks is to create an oven that's like a bread oven. So, and I will say it's pretty amazing what it can do to your loaves. All right, here we are. And you can like hear the crunch. Oh yeah. So now you really do need to let it cool. If you cut into it too soon, it will become gummy. So really just let it cool. And then how I store it, so sometimes I'll cut it up, cut all of it into slices right away, and then I'll store it in the freezer. You can store an entire loaf in the freezer and then just pop it back in the oven for 15 to 20 minutes on a high heat, just to kind of just watch it. I've never actually done that. I've just heard you can do that, just to kind of refreshen it. Or we will probably eat some of that for supper. I also have these reusable bags. They're not a Ziploc bag, but so I will we'll cut it up. I'll just put I'll let it sit and cool, and then okay, so so what I will do to store it, sometimes I'll just cut it I'll let it cool, but I will cut it all into slices and then stick it in the freezer. I just stick it in, this is like a reusable baggie, and I'll just keep it in the freezer. What I'll probably do is let it cool. I'll just let it sit on this wood and let it cool, and then we might have some for supper or just for a snack. And what doesn't get left over, I will just leave in this on the counter overnight. Sorry, in the counter overnight if I think that we will eat it tomorrow. But I like to keep baking it, and it's really fun to put add-ins in. One of my favorites is just cheese, like good cheese. Anyways, that's a whole other thing. But what I will say is, if you stick it in a bag to store it, it will it will retain moisture, so the crust won't stay quite as crispy. But this type of a loaf is to make it light and airy, which I think I was saying earlier, because I want what we call a family crumb, which just means there's not huge holes in it. I can use this for grilled cheese, we toast it for breakfast, whatever. And some loaves aren't like that. It's very airy. This is just tailored to exactly how I like it. So having said that, if you're not gonna eat it soon, I would freeze it or cut it up and freeze it. But if you'll eat it in a day or two, just leave it out. There's no point in freezing it. You can also just wrap it in like a cotton bag or in a cotton tea towel. But yeah, there you have it. Delicioso.